I'm Lumi Lahada, one of the members of Impactors, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our workshop today. Impactors aims to start a movement that encourages youth, especially girls, to innovate in the field of computer science by giving them the tools to get started and inspiring them to continue exploring. And as such, we are proud to welcome you to this How to Be UI UX Wizard workshop with Anja and Lisa. Both Anya and Lisa have years of experience working on real life projects. By connecting the developers with their clients through practical and scientific UI UX, they have transformed inventions into great innovations. It is our great pleasure to have them here to share their insights with us. I would now like to ask Anya and Lisa to introduce themselves and start the workshop.
Hello, good afternoon from our side, and it's a pleasure for us as well to be here. So thanks for inviting us. Actually, Lisa and I, we were really pleased when Lashana approached us and asked us if we could share some of our experiences here today. So I will just keep it short with the introduction. For the last years, I tried to develop as simple to use products as possible. My main focus here is always, as I have a background in psychology, to understand the user as well as possible, and also to try out everything that has been built as many times as possible to really make sure that everything works. And yeah, I think I directly hand over to Lisa.
Yes, thank you really much. And also thank you for the nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here today and share a little bit of all the knowledge that came with the last years. A few years about me, I'm Elisabeth or Lisa, and I started on as a customer experience researcher and designer, where I was supporting startups and companies on making really customer-centered products that are super high in usability and feel really pleasant to use. And I also focused then a lot on making customer and user experience strategic. And by now I am more on the trading side, coaching teams to be customer centered and to apply all the rules to have products and services which are really useful and nice and pleasant. And with this, we will also start on today. I'll now start sharing my screen, and please tell me if you can see it, and hopefully also see it in presentation mode. So I'll just check. Do you see it? And you see the whole white screen. Okay, perfect. That's great. Then let's get started. I think we can easily jump over this slide because we already introduced ourselves, and just jump into the topic. So we have actually two sessions prepared. And the first one is today, where we want to introduce you to user experience and show you how to get started with the user experience process, especially the first three phases where you listen to your users, you analyze them, and you design something for them. And we will also show you a few exercises, how you can try out the new knowledge. And for the next session, we would like then to discuss how it went, what questions you have, and also make sure that we cover the whole UX process, meaning not just doing, but also testing and being better and optimizing. So this will be in the next session. And then let's get started for today. I brought with me here a video, and the sound is not important, but if you hear something, super happy. I hope you can see it, and I would like to just show it to you. You know, the topic of today is user experience, and afterwards we will make a question over a Menti tool on what do you see is user experience in this video. But first of all, let's watch it and see some reactions, and then discuss what is user experience. Going by the smiles, I think you can see the video. Can I have some thumbs up if you saw how it moved? Yes, perfect. Then as it's a short one, I'll show it once more and just think of it. What is user experience? What do you see in this image or in this video? And then I'll help over to a questionnaire. I just love this boy on the right. He's so funny. So then let's go one slide further. And this is a Menti tool where we would like you to answer the question, what is customer experience for you after you watch this video? You can either enter it if you scan the QR code with your phone, or you can also just type in the link and the passcode. And Anja on the other side will hopefully see if it works and can say if it didn't work out, and we'll try to get there.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you copy the link in the chat?
Yes, I was actually right now trying. Anja, could do that. You do that because I need to stop sharing my screen to do this.
I can share my screen, sure. And I will also post the link again here in the chat so that it's easier to access it.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you for the tip.
Okay, so I hope the link's working. Should be in the chat by now. Can you maybe just give us a quick feedback if it's possible to access the site? I was having some usability issues yesterday with it, so okay.
Yeah, I think it's accessible.
That's great. Then we'll give you a few more moments and just type in a few words. What is UX? And I'm really curious to see what will come out of it.
Okay, so I see the first points coming in. Lisa, should I take over for a minute so that you can see?
Yes, please. Then please take over for a minute. That's good.
Okay, I think you just need to stop sharing your screen for a second because Zoom wouldn't allow me to share mine. Perfect.
Stop.
Thanks.
So I see already there is a big blue design, although ease of use, which is really true. What else do we see here? Using the system. This is really interesting because later on you will hear how often it is important to really think about using it and not just the plan of using. Science, front end maybe, also power and smooth. Oh, and I see usability. This is nice.
But I actually really like that somebody put in power here because a lot of people always forget how much power you have by having a good user experience and how important it is getting for our products nowadays.
Also understandable. It always seems so easy, but it's not always easy to understand what someone else has created for you. So this is also why it's important to really think about what do the users perceive and how can you react to it. So really a lot of relevant parts are already covered here. Should I take back over to show what we prepared as the definition of user experience and why to do it?
Please, sure, yeah, just do so.
I think for this,
I really also, I just noticed reliability, and I think you already covered some really important topics here, which we will also talk about today. But now let me just give back the control to Lisa.
Yes, thank you very much. So then let's move on to, what is UX then? And actually it is really easy. You could put it on just one slide. When you talk about user experience, you deal with the experience a user has with a product and a service while they use it, or sometimes even before they use it. There's always something that you experience in an interaction. And the purpose of user experience, or the field of user experience, is to optimize this experience by really, on the one side, understanding what it is, but on the other side, also forming the experience for someone else to use your products and your services. And in all of it, this covers basically why we think about user experience and why we work in this field. But let's get a little bit deeper into that. So if you really think of user experience during the whole development process of a new product and a new service, you can make this whole experience for the users more valuable. They can really value what they get, and they get something that is useful to them, that maybe is also usable, which is somehow of a difference. They can really find the information they need in the right moment. This is findability. Also, a big part is that we will talk about today is accessibility. So can the user really access the information they need? And of course, also desirability. And you can see there are a lot of factors that you can influence when you optimize all your products and services on the experience of the users. And even though a lot of people start with usability, meaning how easy is it to use, how efficient is it to use a product, there's much more, and we just want to give you this information also. And the big question that arises then is how to really get to this valuable, easy to use, desirable services and products. And a really important part is that, as I said in the beginning, experiencing a product comes with an interaction. So whenever someone interacts with something, this is a point of experience. They usually interact with a user interface, that's the UI. And actually, as everything is about one person or one human interacting with something else, there is never the perfect UX or the perfect answer to what is good UX or what is good UI, but it differs for every user group and sometimes even for every individual user. And this is why it is actually so important to not just follow some design rules, but rather to really think of user experience as a process and listening to your customers and listening to what they need and what problems they have, and to follow the process in that way. And with this, we come to our UX process that we want to show today. And I think this is the part where I give to you, Anja.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, for the great introduction about what is UX and what do we have to look at. And probably some of you might wonder now, okay, I thought UX is about having a nice interface. And that's something what you will see today also, that it's about a lot more than just the design of it. And I personally really like that because as I said in the beginning already, I myself don't have a design background, but still I'm a UX designer now. So that's also something where I want to encourage everybody of you, because you don't need to be a designer to make a good user experience, because there is so much more than just a visual design. So basically, if you look at the process here, we have 4 major phases that we should always follow in order to get a good product in the end. So the first thing you do, and it's probably even one of the most important phases, is that you need to listen to your users. So that means really getting to know your users, understand them, know who they are, where they work, how they work, all that kind of stuff. Then the next phase, it sounds really scary, the analyze part, but actually what it means, it just means group the knowledge that you got from your users into a meaningful way so that you can really know what that all means for your product in the end. Then we come to the design phase. That's probably the one that most of you would also associate with UX design. That's really the part where you sit down, you try out what to do and how to do it, and you build prototypes, you build designs. And then we come to the last phase, the testing phase. It really means that I always tell also my colleagues that it's not really possible to build a good user experience without having done a single test. Because I mean, even if you work in that area for a couple of years, you get a lot of experience, of course, you fail a lot of time, you really know what is not working, but still, I still have days when I think, okay, I have a really good solution now, but in the end, my users tell me in the test, no, it doesn't work. And it's just because I missed one single piece. And for this special user group, it's not working like for the others. And basically what is also important here, you can see it's a circle. So that means you go around that circle as long as you're really happy with your product. So it's not a linear process, but it's really a loop, so to speak. Okay, then maybe let's jump right into the first phase, the listen phase. Thanks, Lisa. The goal of the listen and observe phase, as I already briefly said in the beginning, is really getting to know the user and his context. So what is important here, whenever we want to design a product which is creating a good experience for the user in the end, it should be really fitting for that person. So that means we don't only need to know who he or she is and what they do, we also need to know why they do it. And the why is probably the most important part, because every single user will use your device or your service or whatever you're building for a specific reason. And maybe you have some products, like for example, games, where it's really about using the product itself. But for most other products, there's a different reason. It's not just, the user's not just doing it for fun. So that's why we need to figure everything like that out. So let's take a look at how we can do that, or also why we need to do that maybe first. So we've just collected a couple of different potential users here, or different groups of people. So you can see here, we've chosen some which are really different. For example, we have surgeons, we have workers, we have farmers, we have teenagers. And if you look now at who they are and how they work, you will see that it really differs. I mean, for example, the surgeon in his operating room, Lisa, can you maybe jump? Thanks. He has to deal with a lot of stress because it's always critical tasks he or she's doing. They have to cope with a lot of people standing around with maybe not so comfortable postures, all that kind of stuff. When we would build a product for a production site worker, we would maybe need to focus more on the physical side of things. Like, for example, they often have to lift heavy stuff. They have to have the physical abilities to do all the tasks. We would have to consider different body sizes, different heights, maybe also see if it's a woman or a man because they have different strength. If you design something for a farmer, then maybe we have totally different points we need to look at, because maybe they are working a lot of, they're doing a lot of work which is outside. So you would need to consider all the weather conditions. So maybe you need to build a product which is waterproof, or you need to make sure that you can read everything because you have the sunlight, all that kind of stuff. And also, maybe if you wanted to design an app for a teenager, of course, would be a completely different user group. So as you can see here, I mean, the thing which is true for all of them is they're humans, and humans, that's a good thing for us. They work according to certain patterns, I would say, but still the context and why they are doing stuff, that's highly different for every user group. Thanks, Lisa. So maybe what we would like to tell you in the beginning, which is really important, when you start exploring what is your user or who's your user, you should be really open for new input. So I guess all of you have probably a really good idea already about who your user is. And we can tell you for sure, once you start talking to more users, you will find out stuff that you didn't know or maybe even didn't expect. And so it's really important to listen carefully and also to be open, because there's no right or wrong. There's just having more information ready, which is maybe sometimes also not fitting into the big picture. So don't be afraid of that, because that's actually the last point, which is on this slide. All of your users are different. Lisa already mentioned it in the beginning, but as we're always working with humans, you won't find that one stereotype or that one average user, but just a group of people who are maybe more similar, maybe in some contexts less similar to each other. So that's the job, to find where they are similar and what can work for all of them. And the most important thing for the which we would like to let you know here as well in that context is that you should always be aware that you're not like your users. That's actually a mistake a lot of people do, because they assume, okay, if I would use the product, how would I do it? But the problem is that all of you're involved in the development. So you know a lot of more stuff than your user will ever know about the product. And by knowing all that kind of stuff, for example, you know how your product is working, how you're marketing it, who's your the group you're addressing, all that kind of stuff, that gives you a really different idea about the product. So you might have a really different look when using it. So that's just something to keep in mind, that even if you know how your users will probably use it, you should always make sure that you really test it out and really talk to your users to see if that's really matching. And that actually already brings us to the how can we learn more about our users? And just by the way, in between, if you have questions, please always feel free to raise your hand or just write a comment or shout in between, and we're always happy to answer your question, okay? So it's not that we want to keep pushing more and more information on YouTube. So just feel free to interrupt anytime. Okay, so when we come to the methods and how to find out a lot about the users, I would say there are two ways which are the most important things that you can or should do. So the one thing is observing the user. So that means if it's possible somehow, I mean, that always depends a little bit on the user group, because probably you couldn't just observe an astronaut out in outer space, but luckily most products are not for those user groups. So if possible, just join the user, ask if you can maybe shadow him or her for a day, so that you can see what they are doing, and just write down everything you can observe. And the observe part is actually really important for two reasons, or two main reasons, I would say. One of them is, if you can see what they are doing, it's usually easier for you to get a good understanding about the different tasks, because you can learn a lot that you maybe didn't know before, because often we are designing products for tasks which we never did before. For example, I've been working a lot in the medical industry, and every single time we have a new product, the first thing I need to do is maybe go to the surgery room myself and take a look what people do to learn the different tasks. The second thing is, and that's why we also put it here on the slide, that often the users, they cannot really explain you what they are doing. Maybe even what they do is not what they say they do. That's not because they are lying to you. It's just because some of the tasks we're doing that are not really tasks we are aware of. So we might be doing a lot of stuff. If you ask me in the end why I did something, or if I did something, I could not even answer, because I just wasn't aware that I'm doing it while I was doing it. So that's why the observe part is really important. And maybe if it's not possible to observe directly, what is always a good way is maybe you have access to some video material that you can look at, or just can find some different way on how to do that. The second thing you can do to get to know your user better is just ask a user, talk to them. So that's where you can really ask them why people are doing stuff. So what is the goal of your user? Or also you can ask what are current challenges? So what is not working well for them? Where would they like to change something maybe? And that's actually something that they can usually tell you really well what is not working for them. If you will ask them, they will start complaining on everything. But that's good, because that's exactly what you want to hear, because the things which are not working well, that's where usually it's your job to jump in and make the experience for them better. So hopefully they won't complain as much anymore the next time you talk to them. Okay, and because I've talked really a lot now, we have a short video in between. I'm just not sure. I hope the sound is working. If not, I will explain what's happening.
Do you hear something?
No.
No. I'll
Okay.
try to somehow change it, but
maybe I can already in the meantime give you a short introduction on what that video will show you, because it's really a great example where people really took a close look at the users. So it's about GE Healthcare. It's a big medical device company, and one device they are building are those huge MRI scanners. And I don't know who of you had already had such an MRI scan, but if you have, you know that they are really scary machines. So you can see them here in the video. It's basically a big circle with a dark hole, and they push you into that, and it gets really noisy and really loud, and you're not allowed to move anymore. And the problem they were facing was for a children's hospital, because the children's, of course, they don't really understand what's going on, so they were really scared. And what they needed to do is they had to give them anesthetics so that they are calm and enough to put them into the scan, which is of course not nice, because it's an unnecessary thing to do. So they tried to find a different way around that. Said, okay, let's take a closer look. Why are the kids so afraid? Because I mean, you know, kids often they are noisy themselves. They are also hiding in dark places. So they said, okay, they cannot be the main problem. And they figured out the main problem is that they just don't understand why they need to do that, and they don't understand how this is working. And it's just a really scary, unfamiliar situation for them. And what they come up with, I don't know if it's working now, Lisa, but maybe we can just show the image. It should be fine. Basically, the guy in the video is just explaining what I did. And we will send the link so you can, maybe if you want to have a look at the video later on. Yeah, so you can see here, what they did in the end is they created a story, and they really painted that machine. So they really, in that hospital, they have people writing stories around that whole procedure. So for example, there's one scanner, which is a pirate boat, and they tell the kids from the very beginning, when they enter the hospital, there's sometimes even somebody who's dressed up as a pirate or something, and they tell the kid the story, so that there's something, a treasure or something hidden on a pirate boat. And that the kid's mission is now to learn about the pirate boat or get onto the boat. And because the pirates, they cannot see the kid, he has to hide in a box, and it gets really loud because they are doing, I don't know what they are doing, but I think they maybe tell the kids that they are putting the box to the machine room. So it's really important that the pirates don't see them, and they have to be really, really quiet. And by just telling that story, so basically they didn't change a lot. The machine is still the same. It's still dark. It's still noisy. But by having something wrapped around that whole thing, they create a feeling for the kids that they are familiar with. So they know, okay, it's like playing a game. And that's again something they can understand. So it's not so scary anymore. And that kids hospital actually managed to, I think they don't really need the tranquilizers anymore, because that those stories are working so well. I would say it's really a huge benefit they are doing. So that's just some example to show you why it's so important to learn about the users, and often it's really easy ways you can do to figure or to make it easier and better for the user. It's really,
So,
it's
I
really.
was lost in the video for a second, but now I'm back.
No worries. We will just put the link into the slides. So if you want to have a look at that yourself later on, you can just check it out yourselves. Yeah, so now you might wonder, okay, I can talk to the user, but what am I asking him or her? So that's why here we just put some suggestions, sorry for that, on our slide. So it's not meant to be a complete overview, maybe just something to get you started with. And of course you can ask whatever you want to, but usually what you start with is asking the user who, like everything you can learn about that person. So for example, age, or also where, if it's important for your product, where the user is living, because maybe there might be no internet, or maybe there's, I don't know, it's something really special about that situation. So that's basically just learning about the personality and all the circumstances that affect the user in his daily life. Then we already mentioned it before. You should always ask your user about his goals and his motivations. So why the user is doing something. And what is really important is because maybe they just tell you, I'm using my banking app in order to transfer some money to pay a bill for something I ordered online. But that's maybe not enough. So you should always go one step further and ask them, okay, why do you need to do that? And that's what I said in the beginning. So it's not about the usage of the device usually, but it's more about maybe the user wants to buy something nice for, I don't know, his cousin for the birthday, for a present, and he needs to pay for it. So that's why he's using the banking app. So always ask about the motivation behind the user's actions. What is usually also quite useful to know is what sources of information your users are normally using. For example, are they reading a lot of newspapers, or are they talking a lot to their friends, or are they, I don't know, Googling online and finding the information there? That's information which is really important for you, because later on you can try to fit your product into this whole world. Or for example, you can use it for making the user aware why he or she should use your product, all this kind of stuff. The next important thing, which is important, is to know which other technology the user is using. For example, are they using a lot of smartphones, or maybe laptops, or maybe some radio, or some old school mobile phones, because they need to have, I don't know, something which is more stable than one of those new fancy smartphones nowadays. For example, I have a friend, she is working a lot with horses, and she cannot have a smartphone because the horses always break it, because it's falling down everything. So that's really important to know, because if you design a product later on, you need to know what the user is used to, because we are getting really used to all the technology we are using and the patterns we learn. We expect them to work on all the other devices. So that's why it's important to learn about the technology here. And then, of course, in the end, two really important things that you should always cover when you talk to your user is to find out what the typical tasks are and what is important during those tasks. For example, if I'm working in the garden and you ask me, okay, what am I doing there? I will tell you, I'm digging a hole, I'm putting a plant in there, I'm putting all the soil back in there, and then I water it. Then you know the steps, but you still don't know why I'm doing that, or what is important during doing that. So if you ask me what is important for you, I will ask you, okay, I'm digging the hole in one certain location, maybe because there is enough sunlight for my plant, or maybe because I just like the plant to grow there because it looks nice. And you see, so not just ask what you're doing, but always ask what is important for you. Because people often don't know which kind of information you're looking for. So just be as curious as you can and shoot any question you think about at them. There can't be too many questions, actually. There's only one thing you actually should never ask your user, and that's really the only thing you should not ask. That's don't ask the user about the solution. That's your job to do. Because I think you know this citation, it's really old, about Henry Ford, not the builder of the first car, but the builder of the first car who was sold a lot of times. And he had said, if I'd asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And it's actually really true what he said back then. So just ask about what is working, what is not working, what they want to do, and then try to figure out a solution yourself. That's really the only question you should avoid here. Okay, so I've talked really a lot. Are there any questions in the meantime? Okay. If
I
not,
think
if you
there's
have
something in the chat. Ah, yeah, that's about the sound. I saw that already. All right.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Then, so don't worry if you will have some more questions on everything that we just talked about. There will be plenty of opportunities to ask again. So just write it down, let us know, or maybe bring it with you next time. And I think then I will also quickly explain one thing that would be great if you could think about it until next week, because maybe that will also bring some more questions. So we've prepared a short exercise. So if possible, it would be great if you could just think about, maybe you already talked to your users, or maybe there's a chance of doing so, I don't know. And just think about, what did you ask? What did you find out? Maybe what surprised you? What didn't you know before? And also, most important, what is still not clear for you. So it would be great if you could just try to collect that, because it will be the starting point for your designs later on. And maybe if you have the chance of talking to your users, I don't know how easy or hard that is for your use case actually. If not, maybe there are some experts who can help you out here. Maybe you can find ways on how to collect information and fill all the gaps that you have. Lisa, did I forget about something?
No, I think that covers it all. Try to find out what the users really experience or what they don't experience right now. And if you cannot reach the user itself, try to observe them. If you cannot observe them, try to reach someone who really saw them do what you're interested in. And if nothing works, then you need to get creative on really seeing what the users do. So
I think I directly hand over to you.
Yes. So we talked a lot, and you heard a lot now about listening, about observing, about asking. And actually just collecting all of this information isn't enough, because after you collected it, you still don't know what it means or what is the contents of it. And this is why the phase of analyzing is actually very important between listening and then doing it and designing it. And the phase of analyzing is actually quite easy explained. It's about finding ways of abstracting the information that you gained and helping yourself to get empathy with your users, to really understand how it is to live in their world and what they really need and what they experience. And this is also the goal of the analyze phase. It's on one side to structure all the collected information and bring it into a format that helps you work with it. And on the other side, to now really understand what are the problems that you can solve for the user. And why this is, for example, very important, I want to share like experience from myself. I was creating a software for collaboration of researchers. And actually, all of them were telling me that they do all the same. So there were some software developers, there were some biologists, some scientists in brain sciences and so on, many different people, and everyone was officially telling me that they are all doing the same thing, and that they will use the software in the same way. They will go in, they will do some simulations, and based on the simulations they will do analysis. But when I started observing them and visiting several of them, I actually realized that even though they think they're doing all the same, in reality, they all do it in a really different way. Some look only on one part of the simulation to then make an analysis. The others do their research by looking at ready-made things. And in the end, what I realized is that the problems that I need to solve for them are actually very different by every research team they do, and not that straightforward as I was told in the beginning, that all of them research in one collaborative software, and I just need to design this one collaborative software. It turned out that I have to solve many different small problems and bring them all together in one document. And I could actually only see that by observing a few of them and really following what they are doing and let them explain how their daily research looks like. And going with this goal of structuring information, it's really important to keep in mind that you're not trying to structure what they do exactly. You more likely want to find out why they do it. And the reason for this is that the what might be, for example, like Anja told, I'm planting a plant in my garden. But the why might be extremely different between, are you planting it because you want it to be beautiful? Or maybe you are planting it because you want to grow your own food, and it is actually important to you because you really need what comes out of it. And you would only know that if you really ask, why are you doing it, and not put your assumptions too early into what they are doing. And also what's really important here, and we will repeat ourselves a few times, I'm sure, is that the user has a goal, and this goal can vary between the users, and also this goal might be not the same goal as you have. And it's really important to be honest and really find out what is the user's goal, because only if you create something that helps the user to reach their goal, it will be useful to them and it will have some value to them, and only then the whole product idea had some value in the world. And doing so, probably the most known method on how to get into the analyze phase is, for example, doing personas. And what personas are basically a description and an image of a typical user. And as we mentioned, users are very different. So usually you don't have just one persona, you usually have several of them who are different in some kind of their characteristics, and especially have usually some different goals or different contexts that they live in. And here we brought some really easy and small example of two personas. The topic here that we are working on is, imagine you did some research to create a new barbecue experience and bring a new barbecue grill on the market. And you talk to different people who use barbecues, and you find out that they're natural lovers. They want to have a romantic barbecue in the woods, and this is why they are going into the woods and doing their barbecue there. And on the other side, there might be someone who is more like a social barbecuer. They want to have a good time with family and friends, but they don't want to move far away from their home. It's really about the barbecuing, not about the nature experience. And you can then dig deeper into it. For example, it might be that the first group, after talking to a few of users, the nature lovers are a little bit younger, and they usually live in a big city, and this is why they want to escape the city. And this is why they also probably are not extremely used to being outside of the city. And when you look at their motives, they want to escape it, but their barrier or their hurdle is that they need something that they can carry with them. It's nothing usual, it needs to be small. And at the same time fit the food that they need. And on the other side, you have the social barbecuer. They are maybe a little bit older. They already don't want to move away that often. They are a little slower and just want to have time with their family. They want to enjoy it. And probably they need to feed much more people because it's a family gathering, and you need to fit a lot of food on it, and you need to make it really fast to heat up. And you can see, I can dig in there way more and deeper, but even just thinking about different kind of people really helps you to understand who is the persona and what is important to them. And you can imagine a barbecue grill for these two kind of personas would be somehow quite different. And actually the persona itself is not always enough. So if I look here, I have a user, and for this user, I can have my persona, and I'm just looking into the chat. Yes, there's a question. How do you make conclusion when there are users with different views and generations? This is a really good question. And I would like to answer it with the example that I'll just have here right now. So the thing is that you usually talk to several kinds of users, and you really try to imagine what could be different kinds of users and really reach out to them. And then when starting to talk to them, you will after the very first informations realize what makes them different and what are the different goals. And most of the times the goal is the big differentiator between the different views and all the generation information or where they work and yeah, all the other demographics. Basically they come with the goal that they have. So let's look into the example maybe. And if I didn't cover the question enough, please also write again in the chat and I will try to dig a little deeper there. On the one hand side, we have the user. This is the persona. However, the user also has their own mindset. That's their views. This is where they come from. This is what they know. This is also what they do on a daily basis. And they have some motivation on that really drives them. And I'll just jump one step further. Their motivation is what really lets them believe what they want to do and how to reach their goal. So every user really has it's always that way. They always have a goal for themselves, and their goals might be different, and it might not be your own goal of the product, but this is what the user needs. And getting to this goal has a whole journey. There are several steps of getting there. For example, if the social barbecuer has the goal of gathering their family and friends for a happy grilling party, their journey would be that they, first of all, they wanted to be fun and they wanted to be nice, and they want everyone to have enough food. So they will plan out how many people did I invite. Maybe they'll plan for a little bit more because they want to be extremely friendly and no one should be having some hunger. So they then go out to the shop and buy the food. Maybe in this journey, there will be some things that stop them from buying all the intended ingredients that they wanted to buy. And this is where a really important part comes in. It's the barriers. So in an optimal world, the user has a goal. They have a big motivation to do some things to reach that goal, and they would reach it. But in reality, there are always some barriers, like the shop didn't have enough of the meat they wanted to have. So they might need a solution for that. They need to find another one nearby, which is on the way home, for example. And this would be a barrier that you can then take as the designer of the experience and work around it or work with it to make this experience to get from where I'm now to where I want to be to the goal very user-friendly. And this is all of it, actually. And this is also why our next exercise will be getting from asking and observing to really making a persona and their journey steps visible to you. So you get an understanding of who are the users, what do they want to do, and how are they reaching it, and where are the problems in between. So the exercise is actually quite easy, and you probably by now understood it. Try to cluster your learnings into the personas and journeys of your real product that you're creating. And what that means, we prepared a really, really easy template here, which covers just the basics. And you always can and need to input the information that is important for the product. So there is not just one template, it's rather really about find the differentiators by talking to people and then really note them down so you know what makes them special, what makes them different, and what do they like and don't like, but on a really personal level. And in here, you can see all of the elements that I just talked from before. You have the user persona. That's the description of the typical person in this group of people who have some similarities. There might be important to have age and some key facts about them, for example, where they live, or how often they go shopping, if it's about the grill example, or maybe how often they even want to eat outside. And choose an image about them, like we did, that represents their world and helps you to build the empathy to them. And then there's also the mindset. What is in their head? What do they think of? How do they work? How do they behave? What do they believe in? Maybe someone, or I think this is a really German thing. Some people have this big discussion going on, which kind of barbecue is the best? Do I barbecue with woods, or do I barbecue with electricity, and so on? So this is all important in this example. And of course, as I said, from who they are to where they want to get. So the goal, why would they use your product, is also part of the goal. So where do they want to get? How can you support it? What benefits would this persona want to achieve, and what problems they want to solve? And also to understand the goal, this is where the journey comes in. This is when the upper part comes in. Try to list all the steps they do, and they really do, and to list what is the heart, what motivates them in the step, and what stops them from doing it. This is the barriers. And I see there's one more question. I'll just read inside. Does the selection of color make any effect? Because I see varieties of colors have been used. I'm not 100% sure which colors are meant right now. Could you maybe explain your question to me?
So I can see various applications using different type of colors, like Facebook have blue color, Insta have red. So similarly, different applications have different color and user. So does selection of color makes any effect, or we just select it randomly? Like I like red, so I will make my application red. Or is there any criteria for, or is there any effect on users for selecting colors?
Okay, now I get the question. Thank you very much for explaining. If it's right or okay, I would like to postpone the answer a little bit, because just after analyzing, we will get into the design phase, and this is where we will also give you some answers on what is important to think about when it comes to designing, and what parts are maybe a little bit more interchangeable. Is that fine to postpone that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you. And as I already mentioned, this is where what happens now, we get into the design phase. So what did we do by now? We understood what and who are our users, and then we understood why are they doing what they are doing, and based on their goal, their needs, and their problems, we could now understand what do they really need. And why I say it this way, what do they really need, is actually the core of why you should listen and analyze. As the humans, we always think that we understand already the situation, and we already know, we have a gut feeling about what we want to do because we have a plan. And really often in this listening and observing phase, you find out some bits of information that might be contradicting of what you initially were planning to do. And in this analyze phase, you then really find out, what is it? What is the problem that you want to solve for? And what is the need that you really want to address? And this comes together with the initial plan, and then you can go into being creative and really making something real in this world that reflects the needs and the problems and also your plans. And this is where design comes in. And actually, I would always call it design and prototype, because the thing and the goal here is to find solutions to the user needs, but also to make them, to prototype them and make them testable. And I call it prototype because it does not always have to be the final solution. It can, but the initial phase of designing is trying out options and ideas to get to the perfect one by testing it. And what is important to keep in mind here is don't forget what you learned in listening and analyzing. Keep these needs and problems that you found in your mind, and try to remember them whenever you start shifting away from what you initially were planning to solve for. And also a very important part here is that everyone can really do a design, everyone can do a prototype, and everything you do to bring an idea to life, to visualize it, is already design. So design is not just the final solution, it's the whole process of trying out, of making something and seeing how it works. And doing so, I already mentioned the prototype. And as everyone can prototype, what even is a prototype? I have here a very beautiful image of the lion of the movie company Metro-Goldwyn-Mayers, which appears on all the movies that they have in the beginning. And what this has to do with prototype is actually quite easy. This is the final solution everyone saw, and you would assume there is a lot of process behind it. They probably filmed a lion, they cut it out, and then they put it onto the background and had a lot of work there. But what really happened here is something completely different. They actually just made a wall as it is in the video. Then they strapped a lion there and they filmed it. And why I'm showing this is that they did it in a way that would not be the expected way of filming the scene. And probably it was the faster way of filming the scene. And this is what a prototype is for. You want to find a way to show what you have in your mind and make it as real as possible to test it. Testing means seeing how it looks like now. It also means giving it to your users and see if they can reach their goal, or in this way, having the final visual. And what is important to know about prototyping is that it depends on the state of your development on what is a prototype. In the beginning, I, for myself, and I know that Anja does it the same and handles it the same way, really like to make some sketches and talk about the sketches with my users. Sometimes it's embarrassing because it's just your first idea and you really are not sure if this is the right thing, but this is where someone can give you feedback. Because the thing is that people are really good in understanding your basic idea if you show it to them, but they're not really good in understanding it if you talk to them. So even the easiest sketch can really help you to talk about a potential way of solving their goal and really test, did they solve the goal, if they would have this app here and they could click on this button. And it goes on. in a later stage, you could build some prototypes for click dummies, or you can even develop a bit of the final software already and test that bit as a prototype. So it really depends on where you are, but just keep in mind a really easy prototype still is great for testing. And you will be surprised how much you can learn with something that you probably would have thought is not ready yet. But it is actually ready enough to get feedback and make some adjustments before you invest half a year on it and then realize that the initial idea of it was not 100% what was needed. And one thing, and this is maybe really important and a really important step. By now, you had a lot of research skills. You talked to people, you observed, you analyzed, but now you want to do something. And there's also, of course, you can start just making it. But what I would like to give you here is to give you some principles and norms on how you could make a prototype that is really as good as it gets in terms of usability. And there are several norms and rules and principles out there, and you could Google and you could always find them. I honestly think that Googling your initial ideas will really help you to understand what are the principles that people think in and norms that you could follow. And here are the 10 usability heuristics for user interface design from Jacob Nielsen are basically 10 really, really standardized norms or heuristics that you can follow to ensure a high usability in your products. And we want to show you all of them now. And I know it will be maybe a little bit overwhelming because they're really detailed and there are 10 of them. However, we just want to show you the whole range. But usually if you create a new prototype, you don't have to focus on all of them at once. And we also want to show it all so you have something to read afterwards. And if you have any questions or it gets confusing, please feel free to ask, because the next part will be somehow pretty theoretical. And after telling this, yes.
Lisa, sorry to interrupt quickly, but I think there was a question in the chat, which maybe belongs more to the analysis phase. Maybe we can answer that quickly before we continue.
Yes, I now see it too. Yes, it is true that producers produce on the basis of need of users, but sometimes a big producer's created needs of user producing a plenty of production and capturing the market. Okay, I need right now to ask, because I read it too fast. How do you define it? Anja, do you already have an answer, or do we need to?
I have an idea. I'm not sure if I'm correctly understanding the question. If not, please let me know. The way I read the question was, how do we deal with needs that are maybe not coming directly from the user, but also from the company who is building a product itself, because they of course want to sell it, they want to have a good market share. Is that the question, how we deal with those needs?
Yes.
It's actually a really interesting question and a really good point you brought up here, because I think that by just putting up a device into the market, you might also create new needs for the user. Because whenever you're using something, you might find out what is not working well, and then the next step is to address that again. So it's like a circle, actually. So for example, the first mobile phones who were placed on the market, I still remember my first mobile phone was really tiny. Basically, I could only call somebody, which was the main purpose, reach somebody when you're not at home and you don't have your regular phone with you. So that was the first need. And of course, if you compare it, exactly that happened what you just explained. Because if I look at my mobile phone now, it's really far away from that one. And what happened was people got so used to being able to call somebody from when they were shopping, maybe. Then they figured out, okay, maybe just calling them is not enough, because maybe if I called somebody, the person that I'm calling is not able to answer my call. So the next part is maybe, okay, I want to send them a message because my question is not so urgent, they can answer it whenever they are ready. So it's not calling, but sending messages, which would be a new step, of course. And then if you're building a product which is able to not only call somebody, but also send messages, then you have addressed a new need which just arrived by having the mobile in the first place. And it's actually like a circle going around. And that's what's happening at the moment, because with the mobile phones, they evolve because people figured out, okay, it's quite handy. I have a little computer with me. So I don't need a lot of like a big bag or something. So maybe I also want to read the newspaper on it, because my phone, it's not like I have the paper, it's not getting wet, it's small, all that kind of stuff. And exactly that is happening. And we have to be aware that with creating a product, we will for sure create new needs as well. So it's like, yeah, like going around in a circle.
And maybe to add a really small thing to it, because I love that you picked the phone example. I think you're very right that whenever we put something on the market, we also start creating the next demand and the next one. And sometimes you wouldn't even know that you need something before the company told you that you can have it. And what happened with phones, and that's why it's quite funny, is that it started with calling and texting. And then there was a phase of crazy phones. They could do all kind of stuff. I remember there were phones that could be used underwater, and then there were phones which were great for taking pictures, and then there were phones that could some really crazy stuff, like being a phone and something completely different, like a mirror or something. And then after hundreds of different kinds of needs have been covered and people bought or didn't buy some things, it started to all come together again. All the companies had a chance to learn what are the real needs. And by now, if you look at modern smartphones, they all seem to be somehow the same. Yes, they have some different numbers and some different kind of qualities, but in the end, they all do the exact same thing, because this is by now what companies could learn from the users, that this phone is more than a phone, it's a small computer, and it's getting clearer and clearer what a phone needs to do for you. And this is also the reason why we say it's always a circle. And in this time frame, you probably circled around the UX process hundreds and thousands of times to reach today, where companies seem to somehow know what people want because they could learn it from years of their experience.
Thank you.
So I hope that covered a little bit of this topic. There's of course much more to it, but in the end, the old rules still apply. The market only works if there's a value for the user. And sometimes the users didn't know that they have this need, but still, whatever gets bought is what had some value, and then you can learn from it. So as the time also runs, I would like to now jump into our designing rules, or the usability heuristics for good user interface design. And then we would also like to show you some more detailed principles of prototyping about accessibility, and hopefully give you a short ride through different rules that you could follow. So the first big rule of the heuristics from Jacob are the visibility of system status. And what does it mean? If you design something for the user is in a specific situation. And the thing is that the user doesn't know what your software is doing or is intended to do. You need to tell them this. And a part of it is to tell your user always what is the system doing, because they didn't create it, they didn't make it, and they also don't know what to expect from it. So it's super important to give the user understanding of where are they in your product and what is the current status, so they can react on this and can make a feedback and can make a reasonable reaction to what is the current situation. And the best example, of course, is really telling people where they are. You can see here, this is a shopping center, for example. You have several stories, and when the user is inside, this is a shopper, then they look at this wall and they see, okay, I'm on the first story, I'm here, and now I can walk to the store where I want to go. So this is the really easy part. But of course, when it comes to more digital products, it gets a little bit more complex to give the user the visibility of the system status. But still, it's as important as it is. And a good example is, or where it's used very frequently, is to show the user what are the steps that your software can do or that your product can do, and then say them, you are here in these steps that would be possible. By this, you give them on one side the information about what are all the things that will come. Like if you do an online shopping, you can see the information, then you can buy it, then you get information about where to put it, and then you say how to pay for it, and then you can review it at the end, and then you're done. So now you know if you're in the payment, which is marked, you have one last step to do, and then you're done with the buying situation. Or another way of giving the user feedback of what the system does is just giving them a feedback of what did the user do in your software, because even that is sometimes not 100% clear. And a good example here is if you're using your smartphone and you tap on an app, actually you tap on a glass surface. So there is no way for you to know when did it work or when did it not work. So what the phone is doing, it's giving you a visual or a sound hint that you now touched something, so you know, okay, now I'm there, and then you can go further. And doing so, let's get to the next rule.
Okay, I'm jumping in here for the second rule, which is always a good idea to follow. That's when you're designing a product, it's always easier for the user to understand it if you try to match the real world as much as possible. So that means that really the design of your system should speak the user's language. And I mean, we are really familiar with all the things around us in the real world. So if you keep a consistency in your design to that, then it's usually easier for the user to understand it. So that sounds really theoretical now, but if you look at the example on this page here, you see a stove. And usually on a stove, the different plates, they are arranged in a certain order. And if you now would have the task to design the interface for it and to make the user aware of which control is turning on which of the plates, you could, of course, I mean, a lot of stoves, they have it on the front, and you have just 4 buttons next to each other. So it's always a struggle to find out, okay, which of them do I have to turn in order to switch on the front left of my plates to cook my lunch. And what you can see here, if you would just match the arrangement of the buttons with the arrangement of the plates, it's already becoming a lot easier for the user because it's really natural. He can see the plates, he can see directly which button belongs to which plate. So that would be a really easy example here. I mean, there, of course, this gets a little bit more complex as well when you go to the digital world, because here often you don't have a good metaphor in the real world. But what is important here is, for example, that you take a look at the naming of stuff, because people are used to a certain language and they use certain terms for doing things. And you should try to match those. So even if you have your own language for the development, even if you come up with really fancy words, you should not try to teach the user new words, but just try to find the words that they would use for that task. So that would make it a lot easier for them. And actually, it's a thing I've learned a lot of times during my last job, because I was creating user experiences for microscopes. And a microscope, I didn't know that before. It's a horribly complex technical thing, which a lot of physics you need to know. And there are a lot of parts in this system that have a really specific name. And we found out, for example, that users often don't even know that name. And maybe they don't even need to know that, because what they do is just turn on the light of the microscope in order to see something. So they don't need to know which kind of lenses they have to open, which kind of things they have to turn. They just want to switch on the light. And it would have been really a lot easier if you would just have a button which says light on, light off, and not name all the different names of the different kind of lamps you can turn on and off. So that's just one example how you can do it. And also maybe coming back a little bit at least to the question of the color before, that's the first of the rules. I would say color is really something that you can take into consideration. So for example, if you have something which is, okay, green is always a good color to show something's good, because we know from traffic lights, for example, that if it's green, I'm okay, I'm good to go. Or also red is something which means careful attention. So that's something we know from the real world. And if you want to transfer that into a mobile world, that's kind of how you can use color, for example. So that would just be one example here. There will be a few more principles where we can use the color again to hopefully also answer the question, because it's a little more complex on when to use colors and which ones to use.
Maybe to add a super short notice here, is also if we say match the real world, that also means to metaphorically match the real world. And sometimes it tends to be really easy to decide on colors because you want to communicate something from the outside world in the digital world, and then you try to get this real colors. For example, if it's about going on a flight, a lot of flying apps are blue because the sky is blue, and you want to have the user in the mindset of buying a flight or going on a plane. And if you do something for quite of a dark atmosphere, you might use dark colors too. So sometimes it's really just metaphorically picking up the context of the user and putting that into color. But just to give a hint here, let's go also to the next heuristic, which is user control and user freedom. And what user control and user freedom means is that users are using your products and services on their own, and they will do whatever they think is the next best thing, and they will try out things, and by this they will often do some actions that probably you also didn't intend them to do in the order they did it, and you need to help them understand how to get to their goal. And what I mean is sometimes you need to really guide your user, like in the example on the right hand side. If something, if you're in a building and the alarm goes on, the user wants to exit, but there are hundreds of doors and they might not know how to do it. They would need to try it out, and you can help them not do a mistake, not take the wrong door by just saying which door is the exit door. So you basically mark their way out, help them to get the goal of getting outside of the building, and give them the control, but also the freedom to decide to go there or not. This sounds quite theoretical, talking about exits, but if we go into a few of the examples, it might get more clear. So when we say give the user control, but at the same time try to help them to get back if they did something wrong, the easiest thing to do is, if you use a software, you can always have an undo or a redo button. And why this is so important is that you might have intended a special order of steps to get to the goal, but the user will just try out and will just maybe do one thing to see what happens if they click on a button. And if they do so, they actually didn't want to go there, and it didn't bring them further to their goal. So they need to really have a way of understanding how to get back to where they were. And this is why having this exit buttons in a digital manner is as important as it is in a real world scenario of having an alarm and wanting to get outside. You can have undos and redos, but you can also ask your user if what they did right now was what they wanted to do. And this is very critical when you as a user make a step that might be final. So if I'm on my phone deleting a picture. If I deleted it, it's done. There's no way to get it back. So before maybe deleting it by accident or by mistake, the phone can ask you, did you really want to delete it, or was that maybe just a mistake to click it, and help you get out of the situation in case you need to get out, and ask you, do you really want that? Yes or no, I just clicked on it by accident. I just tried what happens if I click on the 3 dots. I never wanted to delete it. You just cancel and everything is where it was, and you don't have to find a ways on getting the image back that you didn't want to delete. I'm handing over to Anja.
Okay, I will just try to make this one quick because I think it's a pretty simple example. I just was checking the time that we don't have so much time left. But what is important is always that you have some standards and some consistency. What it means is basically just what we already talked about, that people get used to certain patterns, how they use a device. And they don't want to learn something new every single time they use a new product because people are really lazy. So whenever I've learned something, I would like to transfer that to different applications as well. So there are basically 2 things that you should keep in mind here. Try to make or try to keep some consistency between devices. So see which kind of technology users are using if they are not using your product, and see if you can find some patterns that you can take over for your application. And the second thing is that you should try to keep a consistency within your own application. So for example, like what Lisa explained before, if you have a cancel action, you should have that for all the steps where you need it. And you shouldn't come up with different namings for the cancel, but you should really keep one pattern that you have in here. And actually, we have one example where we would like to have your opinion on, because it's actually something that I experienced in one of my last jobs. The bathroom doors, they were marked with those signs. If you think in terms of standards, do you think it's a good idea to use those signs to differentiate between the ladies and the gentlemen's bathroom? Maybe you could just post a quick reaction in the chat, or also say something, however you want to. Just a
Also, just a few yes and no would also be very interesting. So the question is, are these 2 icons for ladies and gentlemen's bathroom a good idea to use?
So the signs are kind of some standards which are used to differentiate between male and female. But one problem that we observed also in that building, so it was working quite well in the headquarters in Germany, but whenever some colleagues from the United States came to visit, it didn't work out. So we always had to guide them to the bathroom door, which was the correct one for them, because what you need to keep in mind for standards is that they are only working for a certain group of people. So for example, there might be a cultural influence, like we had it here for the bathroom doors, but yeah, always keep that in mind. That's important for the simple stuff. Okay.
From now on, there will be more examples and a little less theory, so it will be quite fast. I said there are 10 rules. We're at rule number 5, so now you can assess where in the system you are right now. We're quite in the middle of 10 rules, and the rule number 5, or the heuristic number 5, is the error prevention. And we mentioned it today already a few times. Error prevention means helping your users to understand when an error occurred or a problem occurred. And of course, it would be better to not have errors in the first place. It would be great if there's never a way to make something wrong, to make a mistake by accident, or maybe even make a mistake by chance because you wanted to try something out. But in reality, there will always be the situation where someone clicks something you didn't intend, or someone does something that you didn't intend to happen. And this is where error prevention comes in. Be careful, try to understand what are possible errors and help to prevent them before they happen. And for this, you might need to do some testing also, because you cannot cover all of them just with the first step, but you can help the user to not do the errors by stopping them. Like on a road, you usually have the barriers on the side that help you to not get out of the road. Even if by accident you would shift the wheel, they will stop you from falling off the road. In the same manner, just like that, you can also do some digital representations of it and help the user to not do an error. And a way to do it is, for example, if you're in a calendar app and you want to book something, an error would be to book something in the past or in the future at a moment that actually would not be possible to book. And what you can do as the app creator, you can make only the days clickable which are actually available for the user, so you prevent them from booking something that was not there. Or you can also guide them even further by telling them by a color, for example, which would be not just the available days but also the perfect days to do something. And this is also where Anja's previous comment comes in. You then can color code, for example, all the information and say, this is a really good day, this is a day where it's okay, and this is a day where it's really bad, and help the user understand what there is and not making something by accident because it was not mentioned before. And a really good example here for error prevention, it's something that Anja experienced quite a few times. If you would you like to explain it for a moment? Yes.
I can, yeah, because I really wanted to have this example in here because there was clearly meant to be an error prevention. But actually in the end, I think it's a really good example to show where it didn't work like it was intended to work. Do you have an idea why? So maybe a word when this dialogue comes up. So, you know, Skype for Business, it's like Zoom or Teams or Google Meets. And whenever you want to share your screen, this message was popping up. So any idea why this might not work as error prevention here?
Maybe then I'll go here. I would assume that if you want to share your screen, you probably already decided on sharing your window with the others. So yes, it's a nice gesture to tell you that you will be sharing your window, but it's also obvious and you really want to share it. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have started in the first place to share your screen.
Yeah, exactly. It was just annoying because I think the developers meant to make a good thing because they thought maybe somebody accidentally is hitting the share button, and then I don't know, maybe I have a chat open and I wrote something to a colleague that I don't want my coworkers to see. But in the end here, it never happened that you press accidentally on the share button, but it always happened that you thought, yeah, I know that people will be able to see my screen. That's exactly why I'm pressing the button. So even with error prevention, you need to be careful when to use it and how to use it, because it can be quite the contrary, that you really annoy your users when you have too many of those messages and stuff in here. Okay, as I'm already talking, and maybe just keep talking for the next principle.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so the next principle that we have is called recognition rather than recall. What that means is that as humans, we are really bad at remembering stuff, but we are quite okay at recognizing stuff. So I don't know, for example, if you are in a kind of unfamiliar situation, you're trying to find your way through a city, and you know that you've walked that way before with a friend maybe, then often you're standing at the street and you look and you just try to find something which looks familiar in order to guide you through the city. And that's actually exactly the same when you're using a product. So you should try, whenever possible, to not make the user remember stuff, but rather make it in a way that they can see something or hear something or whatever user interface you have, which they can remember. So for example, if you choose to have a tutorial in the beginning to explain what your product is doing, I mean, that's a nice way of showing people how to use it. But the problem is, if you only have one big introduction in the beginning, people have to remember what they saw in order to apply that to the product afterwards. So what you can do maybe is split up that introduction and only present those little pieces of information the user needs to know for one specific step. So this way they don't have to remember the whole sequence they saw at the beginning, but they only have to transfer what they see in those little sequences to the current step they are in. So that would be one example. It's also called giving in-context help, because you're only showing the user that information that he needs at that certain point. Also, what you can do, and here again, we can take the color, for example, as one point, which is, or as one good example, because if you're using a color to show different states. So often what is done is you just use that color, and you as a developer, you know which state has which color, but it's something that the user needs to learn and needs to remember every time. So you should always try to give that color a different different meaning. So like, for example, an icon, a text or whatever, in order to make the user recognize faster, yeah, that's green, that means it's okay. Maybe because you have like this checkmark symbol with it or something. So these are ways how you can introduce this principle in your digital products. So yeah.
So jumping in here, because you already mentioned you can give the user a lot of ways of flexibility of using a product, also of understanding. There's a heuristic that is really important to just keep in mind, and it is to remember that whenever you give the user options to and flexibility inside of software, you also raise the complexity of the product. But on the other side, you can give them some shortcuts to really be faster in what they want to achieve and what is their goal. So you always need a little bit to keep in mind that the more you add, the more complex it gets, but also the more efficient a user can navigate through your product. And this sounds very, very theoretical. However, it is a really important heuristic to keep in mind. And why it is that important is that you have different kind of users, and the different kind of users have probably even the same goal. For example, to write a story in their Word document. However, the way they reach that goal might be completely different, and the knowledge they have before they start doing it is different. So a new user, someone who hasn't ever used Word before, would go into it, would type something, then they want to copy something, and they will do the standard thing they know. They will take their mouse and click on the context menu, and then they'll get an options that they can do, and one of the options will be copying, and then they will be copying, and then they go to the direction they want to put the text there, and then they will again use the mouse, open the menu, see, aha, I can also paste, click on the paste and have it there. However, some experts that already have done it a lot of times might learn that you can also use a shortcut on your keyboard, which is copying by saying Command and C, and pasting by saying Command and V. And this seems very easy for everyone who works on a computer and knows how to do it, but not everyone is so familiar with the shortcuts. So on one side, you help someone who wants to be faster by giving them the shortcut. But on the other side, you need to keep in mind that some people might not be as much of an expert and need another way, a more easy way, a more clear way to also do the same thing. And this might also make the complexity of a product higher. And the question that, again, we want to raise to you is, in this product here, it's a knife with a Swiss knife with a lot of features. I think we can all agree that the flexibility of this tool is quite high. You have so many things to do and you can use it for so many options. But do you think it is a good product in terms of usefulness and usability? And yes, this is the reaction I was hoping for. But still, this is not the complete truth. So no is the first reaction, of course, because it seems so complex. On one hand, you need, first of all, to find the right tool, and you cannot see it before you open it. So probably you will open 10 tools until you find the right one. Also, the grip will maybe get a little bit bad. It will be hard to handle it. But for some very special users, this might be a good tool. There might be a hiker out there who really doesn't want to carry anything with him, and this one tool will be all he has, and he will be extremely happy with it. It will be very useful, and he will take in the little bit of usability problems with it because he needs the flexibility, while maybe, let's assume 99% of people will not like the flexibility and give away their good usability for that. So just keep that in mind. There's no good or bad. Also, there's no right or wrong. Even if sometimes we think there's always more views to the same problem.
It's
and
perfect. The perfect example for guiding into the next design principle, I would say, when it comes to minimalistic design. So maybe that was not exactly what the tool that Lisa just showed you was about. So it was not minimalistic anymore. And in general, what you should take care of is that your interfaces should not contain too much information. So it's really about only showing the things which are necessary, because every piece of information you have in your interface is competing to get the attention of the user. So if you think a little bit more about the psychological backgrounds, a user is not able to capture too many items at one glance. So that means that more items you have in your user interface, and it doesn't really matter if it's now on a digital product, when it's maybe just pieces of information you're showing or some buttons you're showing, or it's a hardware interface where you have different buttons. So it means that the more items you have at one specific place or at one specific time, the more difficult it will get for the user to find the correct one, because he will need more time to search for the correct one. He has a higher probability of getting the wrong one. So that's why a really important rule is that you should only show this information which is important to the user at any time. And what is also important here, and some are always really frustrated when it comes to that, is that you should try not to decorate the interface. So it's really about, the interface is about communicating to the user how to use the system, and not about making it nice or fancy or an art piece. Because every kind of decoration you put in there will distract the user from the task he has to do and from the control or the information he has to find. And I think that's the most important point where we UX designers really differentiate from maybe some other design disciplines, where it's more about creating something which is appealing, because of course aesthetics is also important for you, for the experience you're creating, but you should do it by designing what you already have there and not by adding some decorative features in the GUI. Yeah, I don't know if you probably all know the Google site, And this is a really perfect example for minimalistic design, because what they actually do is they don't have any decorative elements here. Well, I have to admit, sometimes they do when it's a special occasion and they put up some little images or videos or something. But in general, what they did is they followed that rule really, really strictly. They just put in the search field. And I mean, that's what the whole homepage at least used to be about. It's about looking for something. So the only thing they do is they put their name so that you recognize which page you're on in the search field, and that's it. So I would say they really conquered that. I don't know, Lisa, maybe if you want to add something here. I think you had a really good explanation earlier.
I actually want to add something new that I didn't say earlier, because I just realized by right now looking at it that they don't only do the minimalistic design right, which means that there is actually only one thing you need to do, and it's searching. So as long as you didn't search, they tell you, please, here's the part where you can do the searching. However, what they also do right in terms of the heuristics is to help you to recognize what are the options that you have, rather than remember how you do the search or how to search. And what they do is, on one side, you can see down here, all the links, the typical ones that Anja seems to use, and Google can just assume probably these are the ones that she wants. So they're just there in case maybe this is something she wanted to Google. But also, if you start typing into Google, it starts providing you examples of what you might mean. And all of this helps you to be faster and to learn what you can search for, because actually it's just a line and you need to find out how to search, but they help you by helping you to recognize options rather than remember what you are doing. That just came into my mind, and I just wanted to share because we had this principle in the heuristic before. And with that, I want to also jump to the 9th heuristic, which is somehow really important when it gets into complex systems, but not only for complex ones. And it's called help users to recognize and to understand and recover from what they do wrong. And that's a really easy one because as I mentioned earlier, there will always be the case where you couldn't prevent the error, but the user did it. And now they want to get out of it. Like, for example, on an email, deleting the email by accident. And you then need to help them to get out of this situation. And you need to do it in a way that they can find it very easily, and then you can and then they can interact with it very easily. So it should be an easy way to understand, okay, I did something wrong, and then an easy way to undo it. And I think the examples we had previous about errors already covered it quite well. You just need to show your users that here's something you did that you might not have intended to, or that you as the software now know is wrong, and help them to get out of it. Like, super easy. You have no internet connection. Why are you searching for something in the internet? Please get your connection first. And maybe you can also give them, and that's the big difference between just telling an error and helping to recover, how to get the internet now. So maybe if you lost the internet connection because you just switched a cable, you can then tell the user, hey, seems like you don't have a connection, but try this 5 steps and hopefully you will be back. If not, here's a helping number, call us for support. And this is how you would help a user to get out of the situation, even though he just occurred to be in this situation without any purpose. And maybe with this, I'll also jump to the last one, Anja, if that's fine. It's to not just help to recover, but also document and help them to understand where they can find it. So even though it's best if a design doesn't need an explanation, keep in mind that people come in with different knowledge, and it might always be good to have a part of explanation that you can reach, like a documented steps or a tutorial or some videos, just something that if they have a question, they know where to find it and they know how to do it, and or have an onboarding into the app. And with that, I would actually like to just explain to you how to apply heuristics. Because as I said, they are not a strict rule. They are somehow just some heuristics that help you to navigate through the complex process of creating something for the user. And a way to navigate through the heuristics and try to follow them is captured here in the exercise number 3. On the right hand side, we summed up all 10 of the heuristics, and you can look at what you created, look at your prototypes, try to really look through them through the eyes of the users, and then start marking all potential heuristic mistakes. And you will find out that you find more mistakes than you have ever thought. But this is how you then can start to find ways to overcome them. And sometimes maybe only small things like a button seems not to be matching with the real world, or maybe in here I have too many options and I could strip down to a few less to be more aesthetic and minimalistic. And it could be some big ones too. And to train this kind of thinking, I brought here an example with me. So these are 2 elevators and they have some interesting buttons. And I would like, you can also write it in the chat or you can tell it out loud. If you look on the 10 heuristics for usability, what heuristic mistakes do you see here? So maybe I'll start with the first one because I can tell you here a lot of them. On the right hand side on this elevator, you have the buttons arranged in a way that same numbers are next to each other, which now led to the case that you have minus in the top, which is a lot contradicting with the match with the real world, because in the real world, in the top, you have the pluses, you have 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, and it goes down to 0, and then it goes down to -1 and -2. And if you would want to match the real world and make it easy for the user to understand where is the button, to not confuse with, because there are a lot of them, you need to order them as the building is ordered. And this would help them to navigate through it, even though there are a lot of buttons, it would then be easier to understand where you want to go. And this is also relating to the one that I see in the comment. The second image consists of lots of buttons, and this is creating confusion, and this is very true. And for example, if you think of minimalistic design, less buttons would be better, but the building has as much stories as it has, so this would not be an option. However, then we can start thinking of as I said, the match between the real world, or you can start thinking of flexibility and maybe grouping some buttons or making some buttons only available to people who need them. And then I see here in the left one, it's confusing which floor to go and how many times you need to press it. And this is a really good thing, because not just how many times you need to press it, but also which one to press. Is the right button for the right light, or is the right upper button for the upper light? And this is a really, really typical example of, on the one hand side, system status. You don't understand the system status enough. You don't know which one is already coming, which one not. And you might even press the wrong one, and then you would get the wrong elevator, which would be quite of a big time-consuming error that you do. So you could either help users recover by letting the elevators drive into both directions, which would also eliminate these buttons, or you could also start grouping them and bringing them together in a way that it's super clear what button does what. And this would be flexibility and efficiency of use. So you can see, you can always think of many, many different heuristics when it comes to one situation, one interface. It doesn't have to be a software. It can be actually anything where the human interacts with something where you can apply the usability heuristics. And maybe the very last thing for today, as I promised, besides the 10 heuristics for usability, we also brought some rules for accessibility with us. And I think this might be the most applicable set of principles that we brought here today, because accessibility is actually the core of making a product useful for as many people as possible. And what I mean here is, when we talk about accessibility, the idea is that interfaces and environments should be designed in a way that it is usable for as many people, but also for people with different abilities and different limitations. So the typical accessibility topics are about blind people, or people who cannot hear, or people in a wheelchair. However, accessibility also applies, and this is very important, whenever someone is just limited in their ability because of their situation. For example, someone is in really bright sunlight because he's outside, and this person still needs to read something on your product. This is also an accessibility problem. And there are 4 principles of overcoming and being inclusive when it comes to accessibility. And the very first one is perceptibility. What that means is that everyone who needs to use your product is also able to use it. And there are a few ways to help overcome a certain disability or a certain limitation. For example, when it comes to reading, if you know that not everyone is a good reader or can read, or maybe some people have a really strong problem with their eyes, it's always easier to recognize an image or an icon than it is to just read the text. Also, text means that you need to understand the language. So it's always good to have a double coding of whatever you do. For example, have an icon plus and text, or if you have some alerts, you can do them visually and with sound, so that you cover as many people as you can, and you help the ones that have a certain limitation to still get the information. And this is also an example that Anja talked about before. When it comes to colors, just using a color is usually not a good idea in terms of perceptibility, because on one hand side, some people don't can see the colors, but also you don't know what a color means without getting something else in addition, because there are some colors that are maybe some standards like green and red, but still it's always best to double code it to say this is red, and there's an icon why it's red, and there's a text that says this is not good. And then you're getting to a side where everyone can understand it. And also there are other ways of helping to perceive your product. You can include videos that explain the product and show the user how to use it, instead of giving long explanations or just letting them experience the problems and then learn by themselves. Also, an important part is language and standards and what the users know. For example, is the app already in the language that the user understands? Is there a way to switch the language? I even remember a very good example here. In German, bureaucracy is really, really complex, and we have a lot of paperwork to do with whatever you want to do here. And actually what happened in the last years, because a lot of foreigners came to the country, and all the websites about the things that you need to apply about the law were very complex, all the sites started to have some less complex explanations on their pages, and you can shift it by saying just give me the shortcut, and then you get all the information that you need to follow a certain law, but in a language that is so easy to use that you can even read it if you maybe don't know German yet, or also switch the language easily. And this switch needs to be findable very, very easy. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to give like as an example. And maybe hand over then to Anja for the next part of accessibility.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so like Lisa already showed you which kind of the 4 principles you have to follow here, except for the perception where it's about can the user see, hear, or understand what is displayed. You also have the other part where the user has to do something. So that means the operability. That means that really everybody can use your design. And when it comes to this, you have to take into consideration a little more the human physiology. So for example, when it comes to the size of controls, and it's either some touch areas in a mobile device, it can also be some buttons that you have on a hardware. You need to make sure how big they are. And for example, if your user is wearing some protective gloves or something, then maybe the buttons need to be bigger. Maybe you cannot use touch anymore because the user just cannot press a touch button when he or she is wearing gloves. Also, what you have to consider is the body size, because, for example, you have a display which is, I don't know, mounted somewhere. So you have to take into consideration how big your users are. So maybe if you have big differences in the body height, you might need some mechanism to adjust the height of the display so that everybody can read on it or can look at it. And maybe also physical strength. So if you need to press something, to hold something, to, I don't know, whatever do, it might be that you have differences in the physical strength. So you can find ways around it. For example, I don't know, have a bigger handle, have a short, less strength that you need to apply. So different ways around that here. And then I think the next 2 principles, that's a good news. We already covered them with the heuristics. So just to sum it up, simplicity is also something which is really important for the accessibility. Because it means, again, you only show the relevant information. And one thing that we wanted to add here, and it's the only thing we haven't covered above, is that the user does not have to understand the whole product. And that's important to remember, because the user only has to understand how to use it in order to reach the goal, but they don't need to understand how it's working. So that's something that we often try to do. We want to teach the user how the software works or the hardware works, but that's really not necessary. You just need to make sure that he or she knows which button to press, what step to do at which point for time. So that's meant for the simplicity here. And then the very last thing, and I think we've really covered it a lot, is the error handling. And here in terms of accessibility, it's just called a little bit different. It's called forgiveness, but it's the same what Lisa explained to you, I think, a couple of times before, is that you need to make sure that your product, if the user is doing an error, that the consequences are not so bad anymore. You can do that by either restricting the actions the user can do, or like we had it before, just show some message, ask the user again, and yeah, make it easy for them to recover from mistakes. Okay, I think here that's our very last example for today, and a really good example on how you can improve accessibility on a boarding pass. So on the top you see it's like historically it used to be something which needed to be read by experts. So you see a lot of numbers, a lot of codes which are used for something. And actually, I don't know if you remember those old boarding passes. It was always really difficult to understand. When is my boarding time? Where's my gate? In which seat am I having? Because that's mainly the most important thing you need to know when you want to get on a plane. And what Carl M did here, they have a really perfect example on how to make it easy and accessible also for non-experts here, because they, for example, use some more icons. So they show you where your seat is. And they also, the way they structure the information, they are showing it from the left to the right. First, you need to know which terminal you go to. Then you need to know at which time you need to be there. And only then, once you're in the plane, on the right time, at the right gate, you need to know which seat you're in. So you can see it's sometimes really you can do a lot if you follow some rules here. I think that's also showing how you can make use of colors, of icons, how you can get rid of information to make it more simple. Yeah, so just one small example for accessibility here. And I don't know, as Lisa found that perfect example here, if I forgot to tell something in that example.
Just maybe you didn't forget anything, but one thing that I would love to add is, in terms is an accessibility example. One of the previous problems that users, in this terms tourists, had with the plane is that if you're allowed to decide which door, they wouldn't know how to access the plane. And even that they in this example, they covered very easy. They not just explain to you on an icon where you will be sitting and that you're sitting at a window, but also at which door to enter the plane, so how to access it. And I just think that's a funny coincidence and showing how small things like having the not just the icon of where you sit, but also the arrow of how to get there can really help users to navigate through a really complex field like an airport, which is really not easy to understand. And I think that's the core of accessibility, is making the world as easy as possible to perceive and give as many hints as possible to make it readable. And also, even in this case, make it readable without really reading. You only have numbers and pictures. And with this, also in this presentation, you will get it afterwards. We included a few links that might be interesting for some free resources like icons and images in the bottom, but also some resources on the theory, like the NN group, that's Niels and Norman, the ones who also built the 10 heuristics that we showed, and many other theoretical principles that help. And also material design, which is an extensive system of guidelines and components and design systems that are open source. You can always use them as a good example of interactions in apps. And with that, I want to say a big thank you for participating and for also being so active and letting us overdo the time a little bit. And the next session, as promised, will be now after listening, analyzing, and designing, about really testing what you did to learn how to improve and make the 3 steps into a real cycle of 4 phases that help you to always keep in the loop of great experience. Anything you want to add, Anja?
I actually just want to add a big thank you as well. So it was a pleasure for us to be here today. And I also wanted to say as a short outlook for next week. So we will have less theory next week. So you made it through the hard part here. So next week we will also reserve quite a lot of time actually to discuss some more questions that you're having. Maybe if you have time to look at the exercises, also discuss some results, or maybe if you had if you face some challenges there. So please just feel free to bring everything to the next session, and we will have time for that there as well. Besides that, there's nothing left from my side as well, except for thank you and wishing you probably a nice evening right now.
Thank you, Anja, and thank you, Lisa, for this very interesting session. This was very interesting concept for me, and I learned a lot of new things. Thank you also to the rest of the impactors who joined us today, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We hope you'll take the time to think about the concepts we learned today as you look around you after the end of the session, and keep exploring to learn more. As mentioned at the beginning of the session, the recordings of the session will be made public through our website. So you can go through, and also the slides, so you can go through it again, and you can go through all the links and different contents if you want to go check on it again. Also, next week, Lisa and Anja will be building up on the concept from today during the follow-up workshop on all about usability and testing. So if you're interested, please register through our website. And thank you, everyone, especially Anja and Lisa, for taking time and doing this wonderful session with us. You guys had such a wonderful chemistry. It was really a pleasure to join this workshop. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you next week.